Thank you for joining us today. Just a little bit of context about why we're hosting the event today. Um, for anyone who dialed into the panel discussion we had in June from the sponsorship network from the MPA, we had good feedback, good turnout. I think that's the one that Susie, we were talking about, a technical glitch about people dialing in halfway through the event. So it's good that we got that sorted, and you're all here on time. So thank you for dialing in. But following that panel event in June, there was feedback that sponsors or people aspiring to step into sponsorship role, they wanted the opportunity to connect with each other. They want the opportunity to hear real life hacks from other sponsors. How are you doing this? What about this? What about that? Outcomes, benefits, but how do you go about all of that? What challenges have you faced? And how did you overcome that? So we took all of that feedback, and this is why we're bringing the event today, so that we can, we've got three brilliant speakers today. They're on the panel. We will go through in terms of agenda. Each speaker would have about 10 minutes to share their life hacks on what their area of expertise have been so far on their journey. We would also take some Q&A from the chat, and we will round up the event with top tips from each of the speakers tonight, where they would share the quick fire round in terms of what we will walk away with today. If we remember one thing, it'll be that top tip coming from them at the back end of the session. I can't wait to hear all the wise nuggets from our panelists today. I suggest you get your notepads out, watch the recording. I believe the event will be recorded as well. So pick that up at the end of the session. Watch that again, the practical tips, life hacks that you'll be grateful that you listened to today. So without further ado, I will go on to introduce our first speaker, Chris Moore. Chris, I think the best way to work this through, if you come online, introduce yourself and your role briefly, and then we can't wait to hear about your life hacks on making the case for investment. Over to you, Chris.
Tremendous. Thank you very much indeed, IJ. Good afternoon, everybody. I am extremely pleased to be here. My name is Chris Moores and I work for Transport for London. I'm the head of the appraisal and benefits management function within our investment delivery planning unit, which is our sponsorship function, and that spans all of Transport for London's modes, the underground, the bus, strategic highway network, walking, cycling. It spans the social, economic, and environmental outcomes we seek to achieve, the investments we have made, are in the process of making, and those we plan to make in the future. And I find the sponsorship function one of the best for making a difference, for making sure that TfL invests in the right things. And when we've decided to do something, making sure that we, the sponsorship community, can make it as good a thing as possible. I'm going to share 5 tips from my experiences that draw on the ability to maximise being a guardian of value, which is a really important aspect of being a sponsor, and also the way in which we can equip decision makers with the information they need. And the first thing I want to say before I talk about any tips, whilst being a sponsor is great, it is not easy. Even the most straightforward projects and programs present pretty complicated challenges. Objectives, the list of economic, environmental and social impacts that we have to consider and assess choices against is growing, and they often compete with one another. Value for money, there are many different ways of measuring value for money. It isn't just about pounds and pence that can be readily monetised, and it's crucial to account for uncertainty. There are finite resources. Organisations such as Transport for London cannot do everything that it would like to do. It has to make some very difficult decisions, and the sponsors are right in the eye of the storm there. There are winners and losers, and it's vital to take stakeholder views into account on both sides. And the politics, of course. It is not uncommon for a sponsor to get given something to do where the person who is asking already knows what they think they want to do with the answer, and they want it. They wanted it yesterday. But tip number 1, think 5 case. Now, Treasury advocate a 5 case approach to business cases, the 5 cases being the strategic case, economic, financial, commercial, and management cases. But marshalling information for your project, program, or portfolio in this way, I believe, is an extremely beneficial way of understanding the potential challenges and opportunities on the landscape of that and any given initiative. Of course, one of the key products that a sponsor is accountable for is the business case. So if you're in the 5 case mindset already, a best practice business case is all the easier to assemble and slice and dice as appropriate. And it is indeed also highly likely that big organisations such as Transport for London are split up into different divisions that reflect the different functions of a 5 case as well. The planners for the strategic case, the analysts who are going to sink their teeth into the economic case, the money folk who like nothing more than the spreadsheets buried deep within a financial case, the procurement people who want to know what sort of deals they are going to be responsible for signing off, and the delivery function, the management case. How exactly will a given initiative evolve and develop? Tip number 2, imagine you are charged with identifying and developing options for responding to ageing rolling stock on a rail corridor. Well, the first thing I would advise that one does is to set out on a page an options versus objectives summary table, or a multi-criteria appraisal table, whatever you wish to call it. Such a thing will help you and colleagues understand the scope of the exercise, the choices and their trade-offs, what and why the best options do, what they look like, and where you might need to work hardest to collect necessary evidence as the initiative develops. And not only are decision makers quite short of time, and they really want sometimes an at-a-glance view of the position. Of course, everyone loves something that is extremely colourful or has got some funky, quirky symbols in a presentation or a document. And a piece like this can really hammer that home effectively. 4th slide, tip number 3. Maps. Don't assume that someone knows where or what you're talking about. I never do. Maybe that's just me, and that's something I have to put up with because of who I am. But today's mapping tools and digital data sets being what they are, they can really help us assemble hugely effective products that can be used to both check and confirm what one thinks and what one expects to be done with something, but then also to help understand the case and the merits for it too. Here we have some deprivation, ethnicity and transport user classification illustrations for a 2-kilometre radius around Catford in southeast London. We, TfL, we'd love to maximise the benefits and reduce the negative impacts of the transport network in Catford Town Centre. The South Circular passes right through the heart of it. And this sort of information, well, this helps us understand what sorts of initiatives might be most effective. And it also gives us a hugely valuable insight into different social and transport user groups in the area. Absolutely at the heart of assessing the pros and cons, the choices, the trade-offs of any given initiative. 4th tip, value for money, the good old BCR, or the benefit cost ratio. Well, anyone who gives a single BCR figure for something has built it on a series of assumptions around potential costs and benefits. And uncertainty is a really important thing at the moment. It's so important that the Department for Transport have recently just undertaken a campaign to recruit ahead of uncertainty. Much merriment to that direction on social media, but there really is quite a serious point here, that costs and benefits are highly likely to change, and understanding the impacts if they do, the sensitivity of the value for money case to key assumptions, is really, really important. It not only helps inform decision makers, but it also allows you as a sponsor to communicate your views on what you think the important aspects of a given initiative are. Tip number 5, lastly, but definitely not least, don't forget benefits management. This is a requirement for public sector spend, at least, and it's certainly extremely prudent for any initiative that is making a difference. The Elizabeth line, which I hope many of you have ridden already with smiles on your and your companions' faces, well, we've spent several £billion of that. It is only right that we spend some pocket change. It's a 7-figure sum, but that's a really sensible sum of money to understand not just whether it has delivered the transport network capability that we've promised, but the impacts on London and those that live, work and visit us, that those economic, social, environmental impacts are as we thought and as could be maximised as well. Now, it needn't be complicated, benefits management. Sometimes it is just about keeping an eye on data sets which are already being collected. It's really important to use this information to ensure decision makers can be as informed as possible, set out a plan and see it through. That's benefits management to a T. It can be the easiest route to getting a seat at the executive committee table, because decision makers are always interested. And if the number of people doing something, well, the probability of you being called upon rises, and particularly so if it's a good news story. And good decision makers want the bad news stories too. That's my 5 tips. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was really useful. I can see the round of applause going through. I love the fact that you kicked it off saying that it is not easy. I think that's the first myth that we have to debunk. It's not easy, but you really summarized it in from a perspective of these are the practical things that you can do. So thank you for sharing your wise nuggets with us. Hopefully some questions will come through as we go, and we'll pick that when we get to the back end. But yes, thank you for sharing your top tips with us, Chris. Right, so we will move on to our second speaker for the evening. Let's go to Baney Young. Baney, if you can introduce yourself, please, and share your role with us as well. And we can't wait to hear your life hacks on top tips for building key relationships with the delivery team and stakeholders. Over to you, Baney.
Thanks, IJ. Thanks for a fantastic start, Chris. So no pressure then. I'm Baney Young. I'm head of sponsorship in Network Rail. I work in an area which is called Railway Investment Centre of Excellence, and that directorate overall is looking after both the ways of working, the governance, the assurance of our life cycles that are applied to projects and programmes that are touching the railway infrastructure. And of course, as such, we do consider and sometimes even worry quite a bit about our ways of approaching the ways of working, competencies and so on. And of course, we get to hear so many good stories about how, frankly, getting in touch with people impacts and influences the way the project or program indeed progresses. So I'd like to take just a few minutes to share with you. I wouldn't say anything earth-shattering. I don't think there's going to be anything here that you don't particularly recognize, but maybe just a reminder as to how to go about creating and maintaining good key stakeholder relationships. Why is it important, and so on. Okay, I hope you can all see that, but now I can't see any hands being raised. So IJ, I'm going to leave that to you to manage if you don't mind.
That's okay. I'll be on the lookout.
So very simple questions. Hopefully not too complicated answers, but these are the sort of things that I think about when I think about how do you build and how do you manage key relationships. And within these are all the tips and tricks that I want to talk to you about today. So firstly, starting with why. So let's imagine that you are very successfully managing that investment, and all the way through from the very outset to the very, very end of your project or program, you will be still building and most certainly maintaining key relationships. Let's face it, even all the way through, we are doing this for people. I'm conscious that a lot of us here are from transport industry, so perhaps for our passengers, but it's people who deliver projects, and we deliver them for people. So, and in that space, relationships are what it's all about. Yes, as Chris was saying, it's not easy. None of this is easy. And I see quite a lot of effort needs to go into the building and maintaining key relationships, but it's an investment, and it's a worthwhile investment. So I would suggest do not shy. If I had one tip to share, is do not shy away from it. Make sure you have enough time. Make sure you plan that in. It will pay dividend many a times over, but only if you give it the time and the space that it needs to be able to flourish and to be able to help you. So then moving on about who, if you ask yourself, who should you be building key relationships with? And the reason why I put here ask the team is you will already, even from the very beginning, have a notion and a project and of a project, a program team around you. Use that shared knowledge to find out who the key stakeholders are, who the key players are, who the beneficiaries of your endeavor are going to be. How does that map, geographical map, then transform into a stakeholder map where they all are? So I would always ask the team. Also, I would remember and always remember the very end users. And not just the users that are going to positively benefit from your project and your endeavor. Do engage, and this is kind of the second nugget, if I can call it that. Do engage with all of the key stakeholders, whether you will create a fantastic new life and world for them, or whether you will inadvertently, through your project and program, going to impact their lives in a negative way. They both need that relationship created, maintained, nourished, looked after. And so do not shy away from those potentially difficult relationships. You need to embrace them all. Then, so how do you do that? So thinking about that part is ask and tell. So for each one of those key stakeholders, I would literally ask, how do they like to be communicated with? What are their expectations? Do they have any expectations? Have they ever been exposed to a program of that type, size, complexity, duration, whatever the case may be? What would they like to see from you? How do they want to work with you? How would they like to work with you? What would work for them? And that could also help you, not just with building the relationship and understanding your key stakeholders better, but also it kind of brings in the bare bones of your communications plan to boot. Remember that those needs will change. Their needs will change as your project or program progresses. They will probably, most likely, need very different level of engagement, very different type of communication, frequency, type of questions brought to light at the very beginning to the ones that they will need at the very end. And this is true of any key stakeholder. So bear that in mind when you're talking to them, and set your plan with that change in mind. Again, you will need to allow extra time as your project progresses to go back and double check whether this is still the right way to communicate, whether this is still the right level of information, detail, or whatever the case may be. And that's why I say plan and communicate. So all of that will create a plan. Check in frequently, and use that knowledge to move the relationship forward. This is why I want to say when, different stages, different needs. It's easy to say, but sometimes in the heat of the moment and in you delivering and creating a project and a program, it's easy to get into a groove and create one set of communication and one way of thinking about your key stakeholders and just carry on treating everybody the same. Please bear in mind that these needs do change. Your early development designer will need a very different set of communication when you're setting out for them to create the design to what they might need towards the end of the project where the engagement is very, very low, and so on. And this is why I say revisit the map often. There are no hard and fast rules as to how often that should be, but you will very soon, if you haven't already developed those what I call spidey senses, you know when your projects are changing, you know when you're approaching high milestones, maybe a high level risk, maybe issue has just appeared. There will be logical points in time where you will need to go revisit the overall stakeholder map, see whether anything has changed. Speaking of change, even if you have a change request and you take on or expand or shrink your scope or anything fundamental changes on the plan, don't forget to think about the change to your stakeholder map, change to those key relationships. Has that influenced somebody to now gain more benefits, lose some of the benefits they would have had before? So that's why I say revisit that map often. It will see you in good stead. And then thinking about, so what are the skills that you need to be able to build and maintain key relationships? I would say genuine curiosity and empathy. That ability to seek out what does that person need, what makes them tick, what do they value, and then being able to put yourself in their shoes for a little while at least, to understand where they're coming from, to understand what they might be concerned about. Something that might seem very small to you might be pivotal to one of your key stakeholders. But in all of this, there is proportionality to be spoken about, and you will have limited time, you will have limited resources, we all do. Then thinking about how influential and how important a particular stakeholder is, where are you in that relationship? Is it where it needs to be? Does it need more work to develop further? And then think about that wisely when you're making your plans as to how to approach them. But in any and every single case, keep the overall outcome in mind. So that sort of laser focus on overall benefits, on the outcome you're trying to achieve and enable, will also help you focus on what is important, which are relationships, where do they need to get to, how do you need to maintain them. Those skills you also need to use if and when, and they will, you have troublesome relationships that need setting back on the right path. If I have one advice there is, do not let that situation fester. It will never ever get better on its own. If there is a relationship that is slowly sliding towards dysfunctional, address it, re-baseline it, go back to square one. If something isn't working particularly well, find out what's not working, why isn't it working, have their needs changed, and so on and so forth. So start again. I know all of you are doing all of these things day in, day out, but sometimes it's just worth highlighting again. So I will probably leave you there with those few pointers and hope they're of use. Back to you, IJ.
Thank you so much, Baney. Wow, that was a lot in there. The why, the how, the when, the what. Oh my goodness, you could have just kept on going. But thank you for sharing your life hacks with us. I think the bit that stuck out with me was around people it's people that deliver projects. So it's not thin air or anything. Therefore, relationships are crucial. They matter.
Absolutely.
And if you don't invest in them, you're not going to reap the dividends. So that's really, really insightful information there. Again, what you said, there is a lot of times people know this, but it's just when you demystify it a little bit and just get practical with how do you do this. That's really the heart behind what we're trying to share here today. So thank you for making that clear and bringing it to life. Right. So we will transition to our third and final speaker for the evening. Let's go to Owen Kennedy, Head of Portfolio Function and Standards at IPA. Owen, please introduce yourself briefly and your role, and then just get going with your life hacks on principles for enabling project team accountability. Over to you, Owen.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I'm Owen Kennedy, Head of Portfolio Function and Standards at IPA. What that means is that I sort of have day-to-day responsibility for maturing all of those areas and sort of for managing them. and under that banner of standards is around setting expectations, including the IPA's policy around SRO appointments. And on that, just in case anyone who's not aware, IPA calls a sponsor an SRO or senior responsible owner. So I will probably fall into that language. I'm talking about the same thing, basically. I've been asked to talk about what my sort of principles are for enabling your project team, for empowering them. And I've got 5 of them. You probably will find that they are, again, similar to what Baney said, not particularly groundbreaking. You'll probably find that they are fairly common sense, but we do find that frequently it is the basics that we forget about when we are distracted by the ever increasing complexity of project delivery. So starting on to principle 1 is around sort of just being very clear on your own accountability and your own role. Without sort of, first of all, sort of knowing what your position is and what you are accountable for, you can't support your project team effectively. And there's some sort of key areas really for you to sort of be thinking about. There's the understanding and owning of the business case, the requirements, the benefits. That's fairly sort of obvious. The other thing, though, is always being aware of the organisational context that your project is sitting within, the changing nature of that, and what the impact is. And there's also a key factor around your appointment. So in government in particular, and in particular for our GMPP projects, we have this appointment process, the form of a letter that's a sort of an agreement between the SRO and the accounting officer. Don't see it as a tick box or a piece of paper. It is actually your first mechanism to really start negotiating around your position, particularly around the support you need from the department, and start getting those commitments in. And that SRO letter can then start to be both your sword and your shield as you go in throughout this project. And always be thinking about, does this need to be updated? Does this need to change? The context of the project has changed, etc. So I really encourage that. Don't see it as just a piece of paper. Really start it as a point of being negotiating around your role. Principle 2, and sort of linked to this, is be the leader, not the project manager, or rather make sure you're focused on directing the project rather than managing the project. You're really there sort of in your relationship with your project manager to sort of complement and support them. So they've got your delivery focus, you're providing the sort of direction focus. So make sure you provide that context to your project manager. You should be able to explain the changing nature of the organizational strategy, the impacts, what are the priorities, where there could be scope for example, maybe de-scoping certain areas where things need more focus, etc. Be that real critical friend, and provide them that challenge, and just make sure there is ongoing viability. Encourage them to look for efficiencies, encourage them to look for opportunities, and give them that space to manage the project. Let you then have the space to be thinking about the strategic direction, the benefits, the requirements, etc. And just similar to how the organisation will set their expectations with you, set your expectations with the project manager and your team. Be clear on what you expect from both objectives and culture. Principle 3, so I've mentioned this before, but this interpreting and clarifying bit I find is really key to sort of get the value out of the PM and the support, the team. You may end up with a team who you've had to bring in from external. You may end up with a team that has come through the contractors. You may have to recruit people in. Whilst they've got the project management skills to be able to initiate the project, manage it throughout and close it, if they don't have that source of information that can really provide the context and the clarity around why A is A instead of B, a lot of that work is going to struggle. So really to understand your vision, your desired outcomes, and make sure that your team understands it as well and is on the exact same page. Again, I've mentioned those changes. There will be constantly shifting changes. Be thinking about what's that impact now on my project and what do I need to let my team know? Is there suddenly a shift in direction, or can I foresee a potential shift in direction and we need to start thinking about it already? And similarly around the requirements, really start to understand and be clear on what is acceptable, and that will allow your project manager to really work within the realms of sort of what is possible, understand their tolerances, especially around quality, risk, timing, cost, etc. Principle 4, be timely. So I've been on the receiving end of this before, where you need sort of decisions fairly quickly. You might need your SRO to be flexible around a particular issue, etc. Do try and be timely with your decisions, escalations, and approvals, especially where something is outside of even your delegated authority. Take the lead on taking that to through the governance route that it needs to go through to get a resolution. Take the lead on negotiations and seeking an agreement, especially when a change has come in that's going to impact the project, and there might be competing viewpoints on the impact of that. Take the lead in that negotiation to support your project team in those negotiations. On the communication, make sure there's a good two-way flow. So as well as you expecting your project team to keep you informed, be making sure that your project team is informed from the information that you're getting from the wider organisation. And just be very clear with yourself and with your team on what the different levels of authority are, where the delegation is, where a project manager can act on their own. And I have put something on there just to be careful about. Don't undermine your project manager. You actually want you want that person to actually manage the project for you. So don't take all of that authority on yourself. You are obviously accountable for it, but do give your project manager the freedom to act within sort of confines. And that then brings me to sort of my final principle, which is around managing the relationships and the team dynamic. Now, considering we've just heard about sort of stakeholder engagement, management, etc., I won't focus on that too much, but obviously the championing of the project is incredibly important to empowering your team to deliver. Instead, I'll focus on the other aspect, which is also about recognizing the impact you have on the culture of your team. So think about how you can motivate and reward your team, and especially use that intelligently, cleverly to encourage the behaviours that you want or need to see. So be rewarding positive behaviours, be rewarding people who actually are open and honest about where the project is going wrong, and bringing that to your attention quickly. Reward, check and challenge, acknowledge people who are actually capturing lessons, using them, sharing them. It can really be key to driving some of the right behaviours that you'll need to see. And I think the final thing as well around sort of getting the right environment and culture with your team is don't forget that one day they'll go away. So know what's happening with them. Know that they are one day going to have to go on, and know what the plan is, and be able to provide that reassurance, or at least firm commitment to what is going to happen. Is it that they're going to need to go and find a job elsewhere, or is it they go back into a central deployment pool, or they get allocated onto the next project? But just sort of be aware about the culture and well-being of your team and some of the areas that they might be concerned about. You do see it. We have seen it in the IPA as well, in particular when you get towards closure. There's a sudden focus on what happens to me next, and the closure aspect starts to suffer, and it's just as critical as all the other aspects. And that's it, really. Those are my sort of 5 principles. As I said, very common sense, very sort of back to basics. But if you just keep them in mind, I think you'll find that they can have a big impact on your project team's ability to actually operate effectively for you.
Thank you, Owen. Thank you for sharing your life hacks with us. Wow, enabling the project team to with the right accountabilities. And it's just the key things that stuck with me around being clear on your own accountability. What's your role in there? Whether you're a sponsor, you're an SRO, be clear on your role, because sometimes it does get muddled up. And I think there was a question that came in, which we'll pick up in the Q&A, around that thin line between when you have a thin line between project directors, project leaders, program leads, and then the sponsor or the SRO. Where is that thin line? So being really clear on the accountability, that's one of the ones that stuck out for me, as well as the critical friend, and giving them space to operate and run the project, but at the same time being that critical friend that you try not to undermine the project lead in that sense, or the project manager. So thank you for sharing your life hacks with us. Okay.
No problem.
I would like to invite all the speakers to come back on camera if you're not already. We are going into our Q&A session now. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Barney. Yes, and Owen. Cool. Okay, so I'm just picking up some questions coming through in the chat, and I will go to Chris first. The one that's come in says there is unprecedented macroeconomic uncertainty at present, and it's likely to last for years. Do you think this will change the way we make the case for investment?
Yes.
Over to you, Chris.
Great question. Yes, I think it is changing the way we make the case. More scenarios. Pre-COVID, Transport for London had a central and a high and a low demand case and built the case for investment around those. But now we have several, which are not just about overall demand on the network at peak time, but they reflect views on a range of variables, including things like technological progress, working from home, the cost of travel, carbon costs. So absolutely, what I think this means is more value for money points being set out and articulated in a case, and also more emphasis on non-monetized impacts, a fuller suite of economic, social, and environmental effects.
Thank you, Chris. Interesting. This is a dynamic one, and it will keep changing, isn't it? So thank you for sharing your views on that. Right. Let's go to Barney. What's your view on key stakeholders who do not engage with the project?
Oh yeah, this is real life, and I'll open it to Owen and Chris as well. But it is a risk. It poses a direct risk on your project and program, and really needs to be managed as such. People are people. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with every one of our key stakeholders, but some of them do have the ability, and sometimes even, dare I say, propensity to be the blockers on the project. I would try and understand what the root cause is behind it. Again, I say not necessarily have to agree with it, but understand where they're coming from. There will be something there that is causing this behavior just being an outward manifestation of their feelings for whatever reason stands behind it. And then, depending on what that is, handle it from there. As I say, it is a genuine risk. It's not to be marginalized. It is just as big a risk as you would in a commercial situation. So do not let it lie without figuring out what and how to do it, how to go fixing it.
Thank you, Barney. It's a real risk there. So, yep, interesting one. Okay, let's go to Owen. Interested in your view on the role of assurance in highlighting project delivery confidence. How is this used? How this is used to support the SRO or the project? What are your views on that, Owen?
So I I think the role of assurance actually has an incredible important part to play in supporting the SRO/sponsor/project and actually even the organisation overall. What you really have there is an opportunity to have a really frank discussion with a sort of fresh set of eyes, especially if you sort of follow our I feel like I'm doing a sales pitch for the IPA, but especially if you sort of use the assurance review process that the IPA owns, you have 3, and actually we've done portfolios as well where we have bigger teams, people who are intentionally picked to have the required skill set to come in and actually start uncovering things, start picking, start probing, but from a supportive perspective, to actually start highlighting things with you. It's not imposed. To get the best value out of it, you need the project and SRO to engage back with those people and start to have really open discussions. So it can be incredibly valuable to highlighting areas that you are not aware of. You can use it to test areas that you are starting to become worried about, and should you be worried about it, or actually is it okay? And you can use it as well. The reports can be incredibly useful when going up to your seniors to highlight where you may need extra support from the organisation to help inform future investment decision points, etc. So they can really have a wide-ranging impact. And I just encourage you to see it as something you do collaboratively with the assurance teams, reviewers, etc., rather than it being sort of imposed on you. And the final thing I'll say as well is it's an incredible data set for the product delivery function to actually understand where we need to help people be better as well. I'm waffling now. I'll stop.
Actually, IJ, if you don't mind, I want to come in on that point, just to actually support your sales pitch, Owen, to be honest with you. We use, in Network Rail, we use peer review as one of the assurance mechanisms, one of the assurance activities. And we've been using it for about 5 or 6 years, I want to say. And it is that independent second line of defense, if you want to call it that, assurance activity that brings expertise from around the organization and in more recently, even outside the organization, that can shine the light, that can help. And it is easy, genuine critical friend, and that's how I would encourage everybody to engage with those activities. It's not an audit. It's not about checking whether particular compliance has been met. It is about unpicking what's happening on your program right now. How is it going? What do we feel we need to have a look at? And then using their experience, their knowledge, their expertise, cross-sharing that across the organization and wider, to come up with better outcomes for everybody. So it's really worthwhile having a critical friend. And yes, assurance is your friend if you approach it in the right way and embrace it.
Thank you, Baney. Thank you, Owen. Assurance is your friend. That's the one. Critical friend. That's right. Thank you. And just carrying on that theme as well, I'd like to check in with yourself regarding the necessary interventions that are necessary to turn difficult relationships into mature functional relationships as a sponsor or program lead even.
You will feel when a relationship is functioning well, when it heads towards the mutually beneficial state, where you feel how the power exchange is working. So in dysfunctional relationship, power is applied. In a functional relationship or transactional relationship, if you want today, it's just sort of invoked, if you will. So, you know, I am the sponsor, you are the project manager, and we go by our job descriptions, and that's that. That's transactional. And frankly, on complex projects and programs, which is what most of us are looking after these days, it's not sufficient, because you already have so much uncertainty to deal with, so many risks to deal with, that it needs to head towards fully functioning, collaborative, mutually supportive relationship. Again, that gives that working tension, because we all have our elements of work to do, and sometimes it's really good to have that tension. It pushes things forward, but it needs to keep everything in mind, and that feels when the power is shared for the joint benefit and for the joint outcome. So that's what I would say you need to be aiming to get towards. I hope that sort of answers the question.
Thank you. It does. It does provide clarity in terms of what you need to do when it really goes not great, as it does sometimes. These are practical life hacks and tips, isn't it? Right. Okay. Let's go to Chris. There's a question around, to help deliver the leveling up agenda often will mean that the BCR cannot be king. Are we seeing a greater acceptance from the government of the strength of other areas like the strategic case to justify investment?
Very good question. Yes, I think we are. Slowly, but the Green Book is transparent at setting out the breadth of impacts, good and bad, that they seek scheme promoters to be thinking about as they make the case. It might take a bit of time for an initiative with a difficult BCR, should we say, to be top of the priority list, but very definitely we are moving into a world where a much broader consideration of what is meant by value for money is being taken into account by government and those holding the purse strings. And that is both a challenge for sponsors, having to account for many more variables in many more complicated and uncertain ways, but it is also an opportunity in that one isn't necessarily just playing a game and shoehorning a set of arguments into a narrative that they think is what a recipient wants to hear. One can do it transparently, accessibly, openly, and that is for the greater good. That is a good thing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Just conscious of time. Time flies when you're having fun and learning really good nuggets. So we will wrap up 2 questions in one. So there's a question around.
Oh, IJ, you've gone on mute, I think, somehow. I think all of us have gone on mute somehow.
Okay, I think
there you are. You're back. You're back. Sorry, can you go back? You were saying you wanted to combine 2 questions into one.
Yes, sorry, I was talking to myself there, combining 2 questions in one. And the first question.
Same again.
Yeah, same again. Try again.
Again, RJ.
Right. Is it the question that no one wants me to get out today? Right. Let me try that again. Have any of you in your organizations looked at the option? I'm talking to the speakers now. Looked at.
IJ, at this rate, you're going to have to write it down. I think somebody's having fun with mute all functionality on Teams.
Oh dear. Okay. Okay. I'm going to try one last time, and if it doesn't work out, we'll post it in the chat.
Just
it's already in the
chat.
chat.
Keep an eye on the button and just keep on muting it.
Okay. Thank you. Right. So there's a fine line between the role of the sponsor and the role of the program or project manager, and there's a gap somewhere, and there is a question around, have you thought about increasing the accountabilities for the project manager or the program lead and taking a lot off the sponsor's plate, so that way you're not giving little to the PM when they can actually offload a lot from you? And then it rolls into the other question around, how do we align that gap between what the sponsor does and clarity between what the program lead does? So let me go to yourself, Barney, first, and we go around and see who.
Absolutely, but I want to sort of approach this in a slightly different way. There is the topic of what is a sponsor, what does a sponsor do, and what is the value out of a sponsor. It has been hot for many years, and we are still slightly less understood type of a project professional when compared to some that may have been around for several more decades. But what the point is beyond the linguistical elements of, is it sponsor, is it client, is it SRO, and the labels, it is clear that there's certain elements of work need to be done on a project and a program that are outside the delivery. And one, even organization, let alone person, cannot handle it all. So to me, it's not a case of what gets decanted between individuals and individual job titles. It's understanding the totality of the work that needs to be done, and then be clear on roles and responsibilities in your program, who is going to do it. And as long as there's no gaps and everything that needs to be done is covered and people are clear as to what are they accountable for, responsible for, need to be informed about, then you've got it covered. But it will inevitably always be a bit of a moving feast. Organizational models will change it. Place in a life cycle might necessitate a change in responsibilities, accountabilities. You cannot create a map that will fit all. But if you look at all of the activities, be clear about who's doing them, then you should be in a good place.
Thank you, Barney. It's really clear in the sense of make sure there's no gap, regardless of who's doing what, and being clear on where those accountabilities lie. Thank you. Okay. I was going to go to the other panelists, but just in the interest of time, I would like to go around the room so that we can share our quick tips, top tip in 1 minute. What's the one key killer takeaway that we want to give to the audience today? I'll go first. And the key thing I want to share really is around when we are at that upfront stage of defining the values and outcomes of the project or program as a sponsor, or even as program leads, if you want, on the call today, I would encourage sponsors, or encourage anyone really, to focus on those inclusive commitments as one of the key measures of success for your project or program. We all tend to, well, not we all, there's a lot of focus on value for money, sustainability, a whole bunch of other priorities. And there's nothing wrong with that in terms of defining key values for the project or program. There's nothing wrong with that. It just depends on the program priorities or the business priorities. The key thing really for me is around people are at the heart of projects, and we can't lose sight of the end users. So those inclusive commitments, really, if we put them at the forefront when we're defining our values and outcomes, then it will go through the life cycle of the project or program when we're tracking benefits, and we will realize them. I'll go to Chris. So that's it from me. Let's go to Chris for your top tip to the audience.
Don't assume that people know why your organisation wants to do the initiative you are sponsoring, and make sure that you are clear in your mind on 3 things: the pros and cons, the circumstances in which the initiative makes sense, how resilient is it to a change in political context or an input factor such as, for a transport initiative, demand, and thirdly, what is the minimum viable product? Pressure will come on time and cost. What is the most efficient product that still gives you, the sponsor, the benefits you are seeking?
Thank you, Chris. I'll go to Owen.
You surprised me with an order change there. Sorry. So for me, it's probably a repeat of my principal one, really, which is you are there to provide direction, and the only way you can provide direction is by really knowing your project, your role, and what you're accountable for inside out. So I would really, as soon as you go into a new project, new program, that would be my laser focus on figuring out as my first step, really. And from that, you are then so much more sort of able to do your to actually then do your role, basically.
Thank you. And over to you, Barney.
Just going to follow on from what Owen said and just build on it a little bit. Remember that you also are a key stakeholder. So take care of yourself as well. You are one of the key parts of the jigsaw puzzle, if you want to see it that way. So you really need to take care of yourself just as much as you need to take care of the rest of the team and the project itself.
Thank you, Barney. So that brings us to the end of this lovely life hack event for sponsors. So you heard today from Chris Moore, making the case for investment. You heard from Baney Young, principles for enabling project team, top tips for building key relationships with the delivery team and stakeholders. And from Owen Kennedy, principles for enabling project team accountability. I hope you've made some notes. I did as well. Feel free to watch the recording when it comes out. And again, just feel free to connect with people you've met on the call as speakers today. And let's keep the network going for sponsors. I will now hand back to Jonathan to close the event from an MPA point of view. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all. That was tremendous. You set me the challenge at the rehearsal to actually produce a single slide from all of the hacks, and so I rose to that challenge. And I don't know whether Chris, Barney, and Owen feel that I've done what they were saying justice, but it kind of worked for me. So I thought I'd share that with you. Just share with you briefly, there are 3 upcoming events that you may be interested in that have a particular sponsorship focus. We've got collaborative leadership, lessons from the 2022 games and beyond. That's in February. Then we got another knowledge sharing and networking event for the sponsors. That's in March. And then we have another main program event for the association, which is the unresolved issue of project sponsorship. I'm intrigued that there's only one unresolved issue of project sponsorship, but we'll find out more when that emerges. So thank you again to everybody for attending. Please, if you would like us to send you information on upcoming sponsorship network events, then just make a note of Ali Spire's email address there, and if you just email Ali, and she'll make sure that you are registered as part of the sponsorship network. And then please do let us have your feedback on the event. I've put a link to Menti in the chat, but otherwise you can go to menti.com and enter 76140094. That's everything from me. I don't know, Susie, whether you have any final words of wisdom or whether we should just sign off with that.
No, just a big thank you from me to all of the team who've put this together for us today. You've done a brilliant job. And just to reiterate what Jonathan was saying, if this is the first of the events that you've attended from of our sort of project sponsorship network, if your organisation is a member of the MPA, you should be able to go onto our website, follow the appropriate links, and register your interest in sponsorship issues. So you don't actually, if you are already a member organisation, you don't need to necessarily talk to Ali. You can go straight on there and tick the right boxes, and it'll then be on our circulation list for the future for all relevant events. So that's one way of doing it. Or, as Jonathan said, do email Ali, and she'll also make sure you get the information that you requested.